Every morning, Clara passed the same street on her way to work, a busy path lined with coffee shops, honking cars, and people always in a hurry. Yet, among the rush and noise, there was one person who never moved, a homeless man sitting quietly near the corner cafe. He was always there, wearing the same faded jacket, an old backpack by his side, and a calm expression that didn't match his situation. He never begged or called out to anyone. He simply sat, sometimes watching the pigeons, sometimes staring into the distance as if lost in thoughts no one else could understand. Clara noticed him day after day, feeling an unfamiliar pull in her heart. At first, she told herself she was too busy to stop after all. She had meetings to attend, deadlines to meet, and a life carefully built around comfort and routine. But one chilly morning, as the wind bit at her cheeks, she saw him shiver slightly, pulling his thin coat tighter around his shoulders. Something inside her hesitated. Without overthinking, she stepped into the cafe, bought an extra breakfast, a warm croissant, and a cup of coffee, and walked toward him. Her heart pounded, as if she were doing something strange, though it was only an act of kindness. The man looked up slowly, his eyes surprisingly clear and gentle. For a moment, they just stared at each other, two strangers connected by something unseen. Then she handed him the food. He didn't grab it or look desperate. Instead, he smiled, a soft, grateful smile that seemed to carry more warmth than the sun itself, and said quietly, "Thank you, miss. You have a kind heart." His voice was calm, almost soothing, as if he had been waiting to say those words for a long time. Clara didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded and walked away, though her thoughts stayed behind with him. That simple encounter lingered in her mind all day. She couldn't explain why it mattered so much, but it felt different, as if a part of her had been touched in a place that money or success could never reach. That night, as she sat in her comfortable home, eating dinner alone, she couldn't shake the image of his quiet eyes or the way he spoke, not with need, but with peace. The next morning, when she walked past the corner again, she found herself slowing down, her heart quietly hoping he would still be there. And he was sitting in the same spot, with that same gentle smile. Clara didn't realize it then, but that small moment of kindness would begin a story that would not only change her life, but also reveal a secret, so powerful it would leave the entire world speechless. Days began to flow into weeks, and Clara's morning routine quietly changed, without her even realizing it. What once started as a single act of kindness became something she looked forward to every day. Each morning, before heading to work, she would stop by the same cafe and buy an extra meal, sometimes a warm bowl of soup, sometimes a sandwich, and always a cup of hot coffee. Then she would walk to the corner where the homeless man sat, waiting with that same calm smile. He never asked for anything, never looked desperate, and never made her feel pity. Instead, he greeted her with gentle words that carried unexpected warmth. "Good morning, miss," he would say softly, as if those few words were a gift in themselves. Over time, their exchanges grew into small conversations, simple things, harmless things. They talked about the weather, the pigeons that gathered near his feet, and the people rushing past them every day. Sometimes, he would share quiet thoughts about life, saying things that lingered in her mind long after she left. "People rush so fast," he once said, smiling faintly. "They forget to notice the small things, the sun, the sound of laughter, or even their own breath." Clara had never thought about life that way before. His words felt strangely deep, almost wise, yet he spoke them with such calm simplicity that it didn't feel like a lecture, more like a reminder from someone who truly understood peace. What puzzled her most was how serene he always seemed. His clothes were old, his face was marked by time and hardship, yet there was not a trace of bitterness in him. Instead, his eyes carried a quiet light, one that made her feel both curious and comforted. She wondered who he really was, what kind of life he had lived before ending up on that street. Sometimes she wanted to ask, but something always stopped her. It felt like he carried secrets too sacred to be spoken aloud. The strangest thing was how much her own life began to shift. Her mornings, once filled with stress and deadlines, now started with peace. Her heart felt lighter each time she saw him smile. She started noticing things she never had before: the way sunlight hit the windows, the laughter of strangers, the smell of fresh bread from the cafe. It was as if his presence had slowed down the world around her. And though Clara didn't know it yet, the connection they were building was not just about food or kindness. It was something far deeper, something that would soon uncover a truth that no one, not even she, could have imagined. The man who sat quietly at the corner was not just a lost soul. He was a mirror, reflecting everything Clara had forgotten about life itself. And soon, his secret would change everything. Clara's friends had started to notice her new routine and couldn't understand it. They would whisper over lunch or during coffee breaks, telling her she was being naive, that she needed to be careful. "You don't really know who he is," they warned. "What if he's dangerous? What if he's just using you?" Clara would smile politely and change the subject, but their words lingered in her mind more than she wanted to admit. She didn't know his story, not even his name, yet she couldn't ignore the quiet pull she felt toward him. Something about him felt safe, familiar, and deeply human. One morning the sky was heavy with clouds, and by the time she reached the cafe, rain was falling in silver sheets. She hesitated, wondering if he'd even be there, but when she turned the corner, she saw him sitting in his usual spot, soaked from head to toe. His thin clothes clung to his skin, and his hands trembled slightly from the cold. Without thinking, Clara rushed to him with an umbrella and a bag of food. "You'll catch a cold sitting out here," she said, her voice full of worry. He only smiled, lifting his face toward the rain. "It's just water," he said softly. "It reminds me I'm still alive." The simplicity of his words hit her in a way she didn't expect. She insisted he take her umbrella, but he shook his head, politely refusing. "There are others who don't even have this spot to sit," he said quietly. "Give it to them." His calmness unsettled her, not because it was strange, but because it was too pure, too selfless to belong to someone who had nothing. She tried again, offering to buy him a coat, but he smiled in that same peaceful way and said others needed more. Then, as always, he thanked her for the meal and began to eat slowly, carefully, as though each bite was sacred. When Clara returned home that evening, she couldn't stop thinking about him. His words replayed in her mind like a quiet echo. Others needed more. How could someone who had so little still think of others first? That night, she sat awake by her window, listening to the sound of rain against the glass, wondering who he really was. There was something about his gentleness, something that didn't fit the picture of a homeless man surviving on the streets. It was as if he carried a kind of grace that came from another world, a man untouched by bitterness, living with quiet dignity. The question formed in her heart and refused to leave. Who are you really? She wanted to ask him, to know the story behind those calm eyes. But deep down, Clara sensed that whatever his story was, it would change everything she thought she knew about kindness, humanity, and maybe even herself. It was a quiet afternoon when Clara stopped by his usual corner, balancing a bag of food and her umbrella against the gentle breeze. The sun peeked through the clouds after a week of rain, and the man sat cross-legged on the pavement, quietly feeding crumbs to a group of pigeons. Clara smiled at the simple sight, the peace that always surrounded him, when something unusual caught her eye. As he reached for the cup of coffee, she offered. A small, worn notebook slipped out of his old backpack and landed softly on the ground. Its leather cover was faded, edges frayed, but when it opened slightly, she saw something that made her pause. Inside were sketches, detailed, intricate drawings of cities she didn't recognize, bridges shaped like ribbons, and machines that looked far ahead of their time. Some pages were filled with faces, each drawn so precisely it felt like they could come alive at any second. She bent down carefully and picked it up before the wind could turn another page. "These are beautiful," she said quietly, her voice full of surprise. "You draw these?" The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded gently, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Once, I did more than draw." Clara looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked, curiosity rising in her tone. He gave a small smile, the kind that carried both pride and pain. "That was another life," he said simply, taking the notebook from her hands and tucking it carefully back into his bag. His words hung in the air, heavy and mysterious. Another life. Clara couldn't stop thinking about them. That night, the drawings haunted her mind, the precision, the creativity, the vision behind them. Whoever he wasn't just some man surviving on the streets. Those sketches weren't random doodles. They were the work of someone educated, skilled, maybe even brilliant. The next morning, she asked him gently about the notebook again, but he only smiled and said, "Sometimes, life takes everything from you, not to break you, but to teach you what really matters." There was no bitterness in his tone, only acceptance, as if he had already made peace with whatever had happened. Clara felt a deep ache in her chest, a mix of sorrow and admiration. How could someone who seemed to have lost so much still speak with such calm strength? She began to wonder if fate had placed her in his path for a reason. The notebook became a symbol of mystery, of a hidden story waiting to be told. Each time she looked at him, she saw not a homeless man, but someone who had once stood tall, someone who carried a whole world of knowledge and pain inside him. And though she didn't yet know it, that old notebook would soon reveal a truth that would change not only her life, but the way the entire world saw him. Clara couldn't shake the image of that notebook from her mind, the way Daniel, though she didn't yet know his name, had guarded it. The quiet sadness in his voice when he called his past another life, it all stirred something inside her. That night, after another long day at work, she sat by her desk, the city lights flickering outside her window. She remembered seeing faint writing on the notebook's inside cover, a name written neatly in faded ink, Daniel Hartman. The name sounded familiar, tugging at some distant memory she couldn't quite place. Curiosity began to grow stronger than hesitation. She opened her laptop and typed it into the search bar. The screen loaded, and with the first few results, her breath caught in her throat. Daniel Hartman, the name was everywhere. Articles, interviews, old photographs, all describing him as the former CEO and founder of Hartman Technologies, a global tech company once valued in the billions. He had been called a visionary, a genius, who had revolutionized artificial intelligence and digital design. But the more she read, the darker the story became. Years ago, his company had collapsed suddenly, shocking the business world. The headlines told of a mysterious financial scandal, a massive loss that destroyed investors and left Daniel blamed for everything. After that, he disappeared completely. No one knew where he went, and the world simply moved on, assuming he had fled or taken his life. Clara sat frozen, scrolling through old photos of a man in sharp suits, standing on stages, speaking with confidence to huge crowds. A man who looked nothing like the quiet, gentle soul sitting by the cafe every morning. Her heart raced as she whispered to herself, "It can't be him. It just can't." But deep down, she knew. The eyes in those photos, kind.com, filled with thought, were the same eyes she saw every morning when she handed him breakfast. He was Daniel Hartman, the man the world once admired and then forgot. How had he gone from a billionaire innovator to living on the streets with nothing but a backpack and a notebook? And why had he never told her? That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the man sitting under the rain, refusing a coat, saying that others needed it more. It made no sense. Someone who once had everything, now living like he had nothing, yet still carrying himself with grace. The next morning, She approached him with trembling hands, the truth burning in her chest. She wanted to ask, to demand answers, but when he looked up and smiled, that calm, knowing smile, her words vanished. Somehow, she knew he already understood what she had discovered, and that whatever the truth was, it wasn't as simple as what the world believed. The morning after Clara discovered the truth, she could hardly concentrate on anything else. Her hands trembled as she held the warm cup of coffee meant for him, and her heart raced with a strange mix of fear, curiosity, and disbelief. When she reached the corner cafe, Daniel was there, as always, sitting quietly, feeding crumbs to the pigeons like nothing in the world had changed. For a long moment, she just stood there, watching him, this man the world once knew as a billionaire genius, now wearing worn clothes and living in silence. Finally, she walked closer and sat beside him, the question heavy on her lips. "You're Daniel Hartman, aren't you?" she asked softly. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and uncertain. Daniel didn't look surprised. He simply sighed, his eyes still fixed on the pigeons fluttering around his feet. After a long pause, he nodded. "I was," he said quietly, "a long time ago." Clara waited, unsure if he would say more. The world's version of his story had been full of accusations, greed, corruption, failure. But as he finally turned to her, there was no guilt or shame in his face, only a tired kind of peace. "They said I lost everything," he began, his voice calm, "but that's not true. I walked away." He told her how his company had created a powerful new form of artificial intelligence, one capable of changing the world for the better, but when a major corporation tried to buy it, he discovered their real plan was far darker. They wanted to weaponize it, to control lives, not improve them. When he refused to sell, they turned on him. "They crushed everything I built," he said, his tone soft but steady. "The board, the investors, even my friends, they called me a fool. Then they leaked lies, blamed me for everything, and by the time the truth came out, I was already gone." Clara sat frozen, struggling to process his words. "But you could have fought back," she whispered. Daniel smiled faintly. "I did," he said, "but some battles aren't worth the noise. I had enough money to disappear, so I did. I left behind the noise, the greed, the pretending. Peace was worth more than millions." His eyes glimmered with a quiet strength, and Clara realized he wasn't a broken man at all. He was someone who had chosen peace over power, truth over success. She didn't know what to say. For years, people had painted him as a failure, yet sitting beside him now, she saw a man freer than anyone she knew. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was powerful, filled with understanding. Daniel looked at her gently and said, "Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself." And in that single sentence, Clara understood that his story wasn't about loss. It was about rediscovering what truly mattered. In the days that followed their conversation, Clara found herself drawn to Daniel's quiet strength and calm wisdom. She began visiting him not just to bring food, but to listen, truly listen, to the man who had once held the world in his hands and then chosen to let it go. He never spoke with bitterness, only with the gentle understanding of someone who had lived through both success and loss. Sitting on that cold stone corner, Daniel shared with her lessons that no book or university could teach. "The world measures success in numbers," he said one morning, as they watched people rush past, eyes fixed on their phones. "Money, followers, fame, all temporary things. But true wealth," he continued, glancing at her with a small smile, "is found in how you treat others when you have nothing to gain." His words settled deep into her heart, quietly challenging everything she thought she knew about life. Clara had always been proud of her hard work, her promotions, her neatly planned future. But suddenly, those things felt shallow compared to the peace that radiated from a man who had lost everything and yet seemed more fulfilled than anyone she knew. Each day, Daniel shared something new, how failure could be a gift, how silence could teach more than arguments, and how kindness was never wasted, even if the world never noticed. He spoke of the times he had helped strangers when he still had wealth, only to realize that the greatest kindness he ever gave came when he had nothing left but time and compassion. Clara started to see her own world differently. The job she once rushed to every morning now felt less important than the people she ignored on her way there. The ambition that once drove her began to feel like a cage she had built herself. One evening, as the city lights flickered to life, Daniel told her, "People chase happiness as if it's a finish line, but happiness is not a place you arrive at, it's a way you walk." His voice was calm, his eyes filled with that same peaceful glow that had first caught her attention weeks ago. For the first time, Clara realized that she had been running through life without truly living it. Every word Daniel spoke peeled away another layer of illusion, showing her a simpler, truer version of what it meant to be alive. Yet beneath his calm voice, Clara could sense something unspoken, a sadness he kept hidden, a weight he carried quietly. She didn't know what it was, but she could feel it, like a faint shadow behind his smile. Still, she didn't ask. For now, it was enough to sit beside him, listening, learning, and slowly changing, guided by a man the world had forgotten but whose spirit carried a wisdom far richer than gold. The morning began like any other for Clara, the same soft chill in the air, the same hum of the city waking up, the same coffee cup warming her hands as she walked toward the corner cafe. But as she turned the familiar street, something felt wrong. The corner was empty. The spot where Daniel always sat, the old bench under the flickering street lamp, was bare. His faded blanket was gone, his backpack missing. For a moment, she froze, thinking he might have gone for a walk, but deep down, she knew. Daniel was gone. Panic stirred quietly in her chest. She looked around, asked the cafe owner if he had seen him, but no one had. It was as if the man who had changed her life had simply vanished into thin air. Then her eyes caught a small object lying on the ground, his little notebook. It was slightly damp from the morning dew, but when she picked it up, it felt strangely warm, as if it still carried a trace of him. Inside, tucked between the pages of sketches and notes, was a folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, Clara opened it. The note read in his careful handwriting, "Keep feeding hearts, not just people." The words hit her harder than she expected. For a long time, she just stood there, staring at them, feeling tears sting her eyes. That simple sentence carried the weight of everything Daniel had ever taught her: kindness without expectation, compassion without condition, giving without wanting anything in return. Clara sat on the bench, the same spot he used to occupy, and for the first time, she realized how much he had filled her days, not with things, but with meaning. Every morning conversation, every quiet moment of reflection, every lesson he shared had become part of her life, and now, with his sudden disappearance, there was an emptiness she couldn't name. Yet mixed with her sadness was something else, a strange peace, as if Daniel had known this moment would come and had left her exactly what she needed to move forward. The little notebook wasn't just filled with sketches. It was filled with pieces of his mind, fragments of his past, and lessons he wanted her to remember. As she flipped through the pages, she found a sketch of her, sitting by the cafe, smiling as she handed him food. Beneath it, he had written, "Some people change the world quietly, one act of kindness at a time." Clara's tears finally fell freely. She realized that Daniel's disappearance wasn't an end. It was his final lesson, to show her that kindness doesn't vanish with the person who teaches it. It lives on in those who continue it. As she sat there, notebook pressed to her chest, the city buzzed around her, unaware that something extraordinary had just ended, or perhaps, just begun. Months had passed since Daniel disappeared, but Clara still found herself glancing at the corner every morning, half expecting to see him sitting there with that calm smile and quiet presence. Life moved on, but a part of her remained anchored to the lessons he had left behind. Then one cold afternoon, as she was leaving work, she received a letter, thick, cream-colored, with no return address. Her name was written in elegant handwriting across the front, Clara Bennett. Curious and cautious, she opened it. Inside was an invitation to a private meeting at a law firm downtown. The letter mentioned something called the Hartman Initiative for Humanity. Confused, she almost ignored it, thinking it might be a mistake, but something deep within her whispered that it wasn't. The next morning, she arrived at the office. A kind-faced attorney greeted her and handed her a stack of documents. "Ms. Bennett," he said, before his passing, "Mr. Daniel Hartman established a charitable foundation in your name. He wanted you to oversee it." Clara froze, unable to speak. Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages. The documents revealed that Daniel had transferred millions, money earned long ago, from the patents of his inventions, into a fund designed to help the homeless, support shelters, and provide education to those in need. It wasn't the money that made her eyes fill with tears. It was what the final line in the letter said. "For the one who fed me when the world looked away, I trust you to feed others." Her breath caught in her throat. Daniel had never really vanished. He had simply moved his kindness into another form, one that would live long after him. The foundation bore her name, but it was his spirit that gave it life. Clara spent hours reading through the plans he had written in his familiar neat handwriting. Each page carried his voice, practical yet filled with heart. He had left instructions for how the foundation should operate, focusing not just on charity, but on dignity, compassion, and human connection. As Clara signed the acceptance papers, she felt a deep warmth spread through her chest, not pride, but purpose. Daniel's true gift wasn't the fortune he had left behind. It was the trust he had placed in her to continue what he had started. That night, she sat by her window, the city lights glowing softly in the distance, and whispered into the quiet, "I won't let you down." She realized that kindness, once given, never really ends. It grows, finds new hands, and changes the world in ways no one expects. And in that moment, Clara understood. The man she thought she had helped had been helping her all along, preparing her for the life she was meant to live. Years later, the city had changed, but Clara's heart still carried the memory of one man. The quiet soul who once sat by the corner cafe with an old backpack and a smile that could calm storms. That morning, she stood before a large crowd gathered for the grand opening of a new homeless shelter, one built under the Hartman Initiative for Humanity. The building stood tall and warm, filled with light streaming through wide glass windows, and above its entrance hung a bronze plaque engraved with Daniel's words, "Kindness needs no title." As she looked at the plaque, her eyes filled with tears she could no longer hide. Reporters, officials, and families waited for her to speak, but for a moment, she said nothing. She simply placed her hand over her heart and remembered the man who once refused a coat because others needed it more. The crowd quieted as she began to speak, her voice trembling but strong. She told them about Daniel, not as a billionaire or a businessman, but as a man who chose peace over power, compassion over greed, and truth over comfort. She shared how he taught her that even the smallest act of kindness could ripple through time and change countless lives. Behind her, a mural displayed Daniel's face, not in wealth or fame, but as the humble man the world had once ignored. As she spoke, she saw in the audience faces of people the foundation had helped, children who now had schools, mothers who found safety, men who had found work and hope again. Daniel's kindness had multiplied, touching lives he would never meet. Clara felt his presence everywhere, in the flowers planted by volunteers, in the laughter of children playing near the garden, in the grateful eyes of those who found warmth within those walls. When the ceremony ended, she walked quietly to a small corner outside the shelter, where a single bench faced the street. It was a replica of the one where she had first met him years ago. She sat down, watching the evening sun dip low over the city, and smiled through her tears. She whispered, "You did it, Daniel. The world remembers you." Yet she knew, deep down, that Daniel never wanted to be remembered for his wealth or intelligence, only for his belief that kindness could rebuild what the world had broken. As the shelter lights turned on, casting a golden glow over the streets, Clara realized that his legacy wasn't made of money or buildings. It was made of hearts, awakened by compassion. The homeless man she once fed had become a symbol of humanity's truest strength, the power to give without expecting anything in return. And as long as kindness lived in even one heart, Daniel Hartman would never truly be gone.